So welcome everyone to our first of a three-part webinar series on ChatGPT. And this is hosted by the AECT divisions of Systems Thinking and Change, Learner Engagement Division, and the Division of Emerging Learning Technologies. We have an exciting lineup for you today to give you a brief introduction to what is ChatGPT and generative AI. And then we will have some speakers talking about different use cases for ChatGPT in education. You'll notice that there is a chat. You should, at the bottom of the screen, see a button for both a Q&A and a chat. If you have questions for the speakers, please do add that in the Q&A so that we can ask those of the speakers during the Q&A times that we've set aside. If you'd just like to have some general conversation about what's going on, I encourage you to use the chat. Just make sure that you are posting to everyone and not just the hosts and panelists. So at the bottom of the chat window, there is a little blue button with a drop down. So you can choose to chat just to the panelists if you have a question for us, or if you want to converse with everyone who is here. So this session will be recorded, and we will send a link out to everyone who has registered for this session. So if you know of someone that was not able to attend today, you can send them the link to the registration, and we can send them out a link to the recording. So with I imagine that not everyone here is familiar with AECT, so I'm going to take just a minute to introduce the three different divisions who have invited you all here today. So I'll begin with Mink Yang, our president of the Systems Thinking and Change Division.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Min-Kyung Kim. I'm a president of Systems Thinking and Change Division. I am so thrilled to be hosting this webinar session today. So when we first started planning this webinar back in February, we had really rough idea of what we wanted to achieve, but it quickly became clear that there was a real need for this discussion on ChatGPT within our professional association, AECT. So I am delighted to see such a large turnout, over almost 200 participants joining us today. I believe it's coming, getting more, we are getting more. So which is far more than we could have imagined. So I want to take just a moment to thank the planning team, whose tireless effort have made this webinar possible. So this is cross-divisional event, and I'd like to recognize the contributions of Irene and Michael, Junjoy, Scott, Sang, Linda, and Anne Fanzi, who have all played critical roles in planning this session. And of course, the special shout out to Anne, who is leading today's session, and Irene, who is facilitating the Q&A sessions. So I hope you find the webinar informative and engaging. And I will turn over the mic to Junjoy, President of DELT, the Division of Emerging Learning and Technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Min-Kyung. And I am Junjoy Mao. I'm an associate professor at Wilkes University, and I'm president for the Division of Emerging Learning Technologies this year. I don't know who else from our board is attending the session today. So if you are here, please also introduce yourself. We're very excited to collaborate on this cross-divisional event, and we're excited to have this big group of outstanding speakers and attendees today. So I'm looking forward to the session. Thank you.
All All right, and our president, Scott Gibbons of the Learner Engagement Division, is running across campus from a class right now to join us. So he'll be here in a few minutes. But in the meantime, I'd like to welcome you from the Learner Engagement Division. I am a board member at large in the Learner Engagement Division. We focus on engagement in learning and all things research and practitioner-based to help people improve and study learner engagement. I also invite you to check out our, I'll put this into the chat. We have a podcast on learner engagement. And our most recent episode last week was with Brent Anders talking about AI literacy. So that might be something that you might be interested in following up on. All right, so without further ado, let's begin with our first section of the session with David Wiley. And David Wiley is from Lumen Learning, and he is going to give us a brief introduction to what the heck is this ChatGPT thing and how does it work? And what can we do with it? So David, thank you for joining us. Oh, and I should mention, David is also our president of AECT. So welcome, David.
Thank you very much. I will, well, first let me say I'm super excited to be here. I'm so glad we're talking about this topic. I think it's one that we should be talking far more about than we are. So thank you to the organizers for pulling this together. I'll drop into the chat here. I've also got it on the screen. Let's see here. There you go. In the chat, there's the link to the slides, so you can follow along now if you like, or you can come back and review later. I've linked a number of resources in the slides that I hope that you'll find useful. So let's just begin. Let's get right to the basics. What does GPT stand for, and what does that even mean? So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And so I want to take this apart just a little bit here in terms of what are we talking about? Generative, of course, I think is probably the easiest piece of this to understand. It means that these models are capable of creating coherent, meaningful, well-punctuated, grammatically correct text. Pre-trained means that there's an assumption built into the way that these models work, that first the model will be trained on a very large corpus of text data, and we'll talk about how large in a few minutes. But that's kind of a general training pass where the model is trained on a huge amount of text. And the assumption is that afterward, there will be another round of training called fine-tuning that will take that pre-trained model and adapt it to be used in a specific natural language processing task like language translation. And then the T in GPT stands for transformer, and I've linked here, the word transformer is linked to a great video tutorial about transformers and how they work. Transformer is a kind of neural network architecture, and that neural network is a link to a video tutorial as well. So everything you see underlined throughout will be links to tutorials or papers or different resources. And the transformer is special for a couple of reasons, but one of the things that's the most unique about it is this self-attention mechanism that it has that allows it to not just get the meaning of an individual word, but capture the meaning of that word in the context that it occurs in. And the context would be its position in a sequence of other words. So these models are generative, they're pre-trained with the assumption that they'll be fine-tuned later on, and they're built on this transformer architecture, which is a kind of neural network. So when we think about the self-attention mechanism and why we might need to capture the context around things, here's just 4 different uses of the word serve, all of which, of course, are meaning and communicating something very different. And so as you're analyzing text and building up this model and preparing to generate new text later on, you need to be able to capture not just the word and its definition, but what it means in a given context that it finds itself embedded in. And that's really what this self-attention mechanism is all about. So what's the big deal about transformers? Well, there are 2 things about them that are amazing in that they, if you're familiar with the kind of iron triangle of project management, transformers just break the iron triangle in half. They're faster and they're cheaper and they're better quality than what came before. So they're faster and cheaper to train, and that previous neural network architectures were trained either sequentially or in a hierarchical manner, and transformers can be trained in parallel, which makes them a ton faster and significantly cheaper to train. And they also just result in better quality outputs because this self-attention mechanism helps them identify those relationships between individual elements in the sequence and its context in the sequence more effectively. So the seminal paper here is called All You Need Is Attention. This is the paper in which the first transformer was described. And in that paper, they showed that with only 3.5 days of training on only 8 GPUs, they were able to beat the best performance from any other model existing then at the time. So extremely fast, not very resource intensive for this first transformer. So the big deal about them is they're faster, cheaper, more accurate than the kind of neural networks we had before, at least for these NLP applications. So how does ChatGPT specifically work, right? So ChatGPT was originally built around GPT version 3, released by a company called OpenAI. And GPT-3 was trained on over 45 terabytes of text, and including parts of the Common Crawl dataset. And that the Common Crawl dataset is just a huge crawl of much of the publicly available internet that's all pulled together and is in one spot and is free for anyone to download and do any kind of analysis that they'd like to do over. But the Common Crawl includes books, articles, websites, scientific papers, and as we'll see, it also includes source code from websites like GitHub. Now, there's no information about GPT-4, which is the newest version of GPT. Up until GPT version 3, OpenAI had been very kind of open, as in their name, and transparent with what they were doing and how they were doing it. But that all stopped very suddenly with GPT-4. We don't have any information about how big the data set was it was trained on, how long it took, the kinds of resources that they used, or things like that. But we can extrapolate that it must have been significantly bigger than the set of data that GPT-3 was trained on, probably in the petabytes of data range. So ChatGPT, remember we said that GPTs, they're pre-trained, and the idea is that later they'll be fine-tuned for specific NLP purposes. ChatGPT is a GPT that's been fine-tuned to generate responses to user prompts in a conversational way. It's been fine-tuned in a way to make it effective at having conversations with you. And so that fine-tuning was done with data like chat logs from customer service representatives, talking to customers who are asking them questions and they're answering. Also by looking at conversations from question and answer sites like Quora or Stack Overflow. But ChatGPT is just a GPT that's been fine-tuned in this particular way, fine-tuned to respond to prompts in a conversational way. A little bit more about how they work. The GPT models are autoregressive. That means that their output, the next, if you've ever played with ChatGPT, you've seen it kind of famously produces one word at a time that appears on the screen instead of just dropping whole blocks of text in. And being autoregressive means that the word that's about to be output is based on a prediction that looks at all the words, well, not all the words, we'll talk about that in the next paragraph here, but many of the words that came before it. And given the context of all those words in that sequence, what's the next word that should come? And then once that word has come, it's added to that whole list of things and used to predict the next word that should come. So that's what it means that it's autoregressive. And I've got a visual of that here in just a moment. And so the context window for a transformer like this is the number of words that it can look back at in order to predict the word that's going to come next. So for GPT-3, the context window was about 3,000 words. So you could look at 3,000 words and then try to predict what the next one would be. For GPT-4, the context window is about 25,000 words. So you can have significantly longer prompts, significantly more complex prompts. In some cases, you can just drop the full text of an entire scientific article in as part of your prompt, and then say something like, summarize that for me, or translate that into Spanish for me. But this bigger context window means that that the transformer can look further back so that it has more information and can make a more accurate prediction about which word should come next. So think about, like, from my, maybe it predicts name, and then from my name, what would come next? My name is, what would come after that? David. And so every word that's predicted, the output at one step becomes part of the input at the next step. And if that input gets sufficiently long, so for example, in your conversation with ChatGPT, if you talk to it long enough, eventually the first things that you wrote will get pushed out of the stack, because you only get, if you're using the 3.5 GPT in your ChatGPT conversation, you've only got about 3,000 words worth of context window. So that window just slides down and slides down. And once there's been 4,000 words worth of stuff that's happened, it doesn't have access to the first 1,000 words anymore. So that bigger context window of GPT-4 is a really, really big deal. So just to give a couple of really quick examples of ways that ChatGPT can be used, and I've got some links down here at the bottom right for these next several slides. Khan Academy had an early partnership with OpenAI that's allowed them to kind of get ahead of everybody else in what they've been able to do with ChatGPT integration for Khan Academy. And so you can see an example here on the left, which is around tutoring a student in math. And so in these cases, ChatGPT is acting as a tutor in each of these three instances. And the student's saying, "Can you just tell me the answer?" And Conmigo, which is the name of their chat client, says, "No, it's important you learn how to do it by yourself." And so this is part of the fine tuning, right, of teaching the model, in this case, not to just give answers, but to provide hints or steps or ways to think about things. "Can you just tell me the answer?" Well, they need to be in the same denominator. Actually, they don't in this case, because you're multiplying. What else could you try? There, right? Or here's a case around creative writing, right? Tell me more, where the chatbot is prompting the student, "Tell me more about your character." Well, she likes dogs, she's scared of the dark. Okay, that's a great start. Now, what kind of problem might your character face, right? So not just prompting around math, but also around creative writing, and then coding. Some of the most impressive demos that I have seen so far have been around coding. And so here's an example where a student says, "Hey, my code's not working. What's wrong?" And just dump some code in. And ChatGPT analyzes it and says, "Well, you forgot to iterate your counter variable, and consequently, you're going to be stuck inside that loop forever." So the kind of tutoring that can be done for students, and particularly when you think about fine-tuning, not just fine-tuning to help the tutor behave more like a tutor and not give an answer, but try to help students think through things, but fine-tuning around specific disciplines. If you're creating a tutor for an introduction to psychology course, for example, lots of opportunities here for ChatGPT with students. ChatGPT for researchers is just completely insane. Just a few weeks ago, and every day feels like a year if you're trying to follow what's happening in this space. There's just so much going on every single day. Not very long ago, just a couple of weeks ago, OpenAI introduced a plugin architecture for ChatGPT so that you could connect ChatGPT to other resources like Wolfram Alpha. So ChatGPT, because it's a language model, it's famously bad at computational tasks, right? You add it to multiply numbers together and it will sometimes give ridiculous results. Well, it's a language model. It's a very large language model. That's where the LLM comes from, right? So by being able to, for example, plug together ChatGPT plus Wolfram Alpha, now ChatGPT can analyze things that come through, prompts that come in, and say, "Oh, that's a computational task. Let me pass that off to Wolfram Alpha, get the answer back from Wolfram Alpha, turn it into words, and hand it back to you." So these plugins allow it to take this already amazing capability that ChatGPT has and expands it into a number of other domains. Well, one of those is a code interpreter. And ChatGPT has always been fabulous at writing code and presenting code to you. I don't know if anybody else is doing this. Maybe you can share in the chat. But one of the ways that I use ChatGPT frequently is, instead of writing all my code, I just write the comments for my code of, I need code that does this, I need it that does this, I need it to do that. And then I throw the comments into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will just write all the code based on the comments. And sometimes it works just completely right, just copied and pasted into my IDE. Sometimes it needs a little tweaking. But ChatGPT has always been good at writing code. The code interpreter plugin allows ChatGPT to write and run code and return the results of that analysis. So these next three examples are really they're just crazy. So this person took a CSV of San Francisco crime data and just uploaded the CSV file to ChatGPT and said, visualize some of the trends in this data for me. It dropped into a Python notebook, wrote all the code to import the data out of the CSV, start generating graphics, and then returned the graphics along with, some analysis information there. And at every point, you can check its work by dropping in and looking at the code that it's generating in the Python notebooks in the back. This person calls out academia specifically, says we're in for a wild ride. So all they did here was upload some census data and a data dictionary to GPT with the code interpreter. Now, you probably do not have access to the code interpreter. The plugins are being rolled out very slowly. So if you're like, wait, I've been in ChatGPT, but I haven't seen these plugins before. No, you haven't. You need to apply to get on the wait list for them, and then eventually you'll get access to them. But this person just uploaded census data and said, hey, generate some interesting draft hypotheses and test them with these data. If you need to, make assumptions if you need to. And when you're done, put it in a paper. And so here's the introduction and the methodology and the results and discussion. I mean, it's only it's probably 1,500 words. Like, it's not a full-length paper per se, but it's generated the bones of a paper together with visualizations to go with that, which is crazy. And this is maybe my favorite example. And I would encourage you, this embedded video here in this tweet's about 5 minutes long. I'd encourage you to watch the whole video. It's just kind of mind-blowing. This person uploads a spreadsheet with information about different segments of the music market internationally, and says, do some analysis of this for me. Okay, break it into segments. So break it into more. So you broke it into 3. I actually want 5. I want a little more fine-grained. Break it into 5. Okay, given what we know now about each of those segments, help me create a business plan for a music business that wants to do more work in each of those segments. So help me develop individual business plans for all 5 segments based on the characteristics that you just uncovered about those in your previous analysis. And just keeps going and going. And it's just absolutely incredible. I've got a couple slides here from a presentation that I gave with a colleague of mine, Wendy King, back in the first week of March. So if you saw that, I apologize for a little repetition here. But given that AECT is a community of instructional designers, I thought I might dive just a little deeper on the instructional design side, or teachers as well. But here's an example of a longer prompt. This is all prompt from Wendy that Wendy had written. She's one of the course product managers at Lumen. Teaching ChatGPT how to write assessment questions in the specific way she wants them to be written, right? I want you to write assessment questions following this specific style. Must be multiple choice, must be 4 answers. Can't be all of the above or multiple answer. Can't be a tricky question like AECT. Should be a reflection or an application question. Should be connected to a specific learning outcome. Every question response needs to have its own targeted feedback, and the feedback has to be unique, and it has to combat common misconceptions, et cetera, et cetera. And then she provides an example. Here's a learning outcome, here's some text, and then she's down at the bottom, you can't see it, but she's got an assessment item that meets all these criteria down at the bottom there. So she teaches it. Here's exactly what I want. Make me another one of these. This is great. Here's another one for you. Here's the question, answers, feedback, whether it's correct or incorrect. If it's incorrect, some feedback there to help you. Once you like that question, maybe you need 3 or 4 more because you're trying to build an item bank. We've just asked ChatGPT to make a clone of that question for you. Create a clone, in other words, a copy, but using a different scenario or different wording of this question about the replication crisis. Bang, there it is. Oops, you forgot to put the feedback in there. Okay, here's the feedback. This one's correct, this one's incorrect, here's why, etc. And then, of course, all the way through, you're always taking its output and editing it, revising it, tweaking it a little bit. ChatGPT isn't a place that you go to create finished products with the wave of a magic wand, but it is a place where you go to create drafts that are 90% done with the wave of a magic prompt, right? And then another really interesting use case here for a video, about which we wanted to have some questions where students would pause partway through the video, have to think about some questions, provide responses to them. So they're actually engaged instead of just sitting back watching a video. So take the video transcript and just dump it into ChatGPT and ask it to write questions in that same format, edit and revise. Right, so lots of really interesting applications for us. And this is just on the assessment side. Learning outcome writing, content authoring, examples in different formats. Oh my gosh, give me an example about basketball. Give me an example about GPUs. Give me an example about, using students in the state of Georgia. Just keep prompting it through that conversation. Prompt, getting more and more back. So let me leave you with a couple things to ponder, and then hopefully I've left a minute or two for us to have some conversation. The first empirical study on the impact of ChatGPT on work was published recently. It was done in the context of customer service reps. And what they found in that study was that a company that took ChatGPT and fine-tuned it using its own database of information that customer service reps are supposed to know as they're talking to people, giving customer service reps access to that fine-tuned ChatGPT improved their productivity by 14%, like that. In other words, they were able to handle 14% more requests for help per unit time than they had before. Turnover decreased, particularly among new hires, where there's normally a lot of churn, where people jump in and they're lost and overwhelmed and people are yelling at them and they're just done. They managed to decrease turnover among their new hires, and customers were actually giving higher ratings to the customer service reps when they were using ChatGPT than they were giving them before they were using. So the customers were happier as well. So this is really interesting. We'll see a ton more of this in the future, because this kind of generative AI, it's not the real use case here isn't replacing a person with ChatGPT, but it might be replacing 2 or 3 people with 1 person plus ChatGPT, right? It's like all technology that came before, it creates productivity gains. It increases productivity. So in as much as it increases productivity, businesses are going to be super interested in this. So I would ask you to ponder, how competitive would your students be on the job market if they learned how to use tools like ChatGPT really effectively, and they had that on their resume, had it in their portfolio? On the other side of the coin, how competitive would your students be if you prohibited them from using it, punished them if you caught them using it, and they came out of school really with no experience with these kinds of tools? And what kind of world are we preparing them to go be employed, work, and succeed in? Another quick thing to ponder, open source is once again going to win in this space. A training model like GPT-3 likely cost about $5 million. And estimates for GPT-4 were that it was probably closer to 200 million. That's not the research and the development and the people time. That's literally just electricity running into GPUs for weeks and weeks and weeks. This is the cost, just the cost of training, right? But once a model's trained, if that model is open sourced, then anybody can fine tune it, right? And the important thing about fine tunings is that they're stackable. You can take my fine tuning about how to turn ChatGPT into a really effective tutor that won't give you answers, and you can stack another fine tuning on top of it, giving it more domain knowledge about introductory biology. And someone else can stack another fine tuning on top of that, right? So these fine tunings are stackable. And that means that when you've got a community of thousands and thousands of people, like you do at Hugging Face, for example, when huggingface.co, when all those people are working together, making their own fine tunings and sharing those with each other, and all of them can be stacked on top of each other, those stacked improvements, even if they start from a smaller model, are eventually going to outperform the ginormous models that have fewer people actually working on them and tending them. If you're into open source at all, I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you read this paper, We Have No Moat, which ostensibly is a document leaked from Google recently. It reminds me a lot of the Halloween documents that were leaked from Microsoft back in the late 90s when open source was first becoming a thing. the analysis in that document is incredible. I'd encourage you to look at that. And then another thought to ponder here is that these fine-tuned model weights that can be shared and stacked, I think are going to emerge as the most important form of OER over the next 2 to 3 years. We're not going to be talking about writing words in a textbook and having an open textbook. I think the direction that OER is going to move is toward these shareable model weights. Final thought to ponder. Is there a lot for us to figure out? Yes. Are there legitimate concerns, and are there even dangers? Yes. Will it be worth our time and effort to work through all of those? 100% yes, I believe it will. And that's the end of what I prepared. I'd love to do some question and answer. I think somebody was monitoring the QA there. Let me shut up for a minute and ask Anne or Arlene, who's moderating that?
So, David, thank you so much. I learned so much from that, and I have already been diving deep into ChatGPT and generative AI for, it seems like years, but it's only been months. So thank you so much, and for those great resources, and we'll share also the link to your slides so that people have links to those. And we will share links to the chat as well, because there's links in there too. So we're actually going to save the questions. So please post those into the Q&A. You can also comment on those as well. So if you see someone with a similar question or you have an answer to, please go ahead and respond to those. You can also thumb up so that they rise up higher in the list. And we will address those questions as we have time. The other thing that I'd like to do is to get you thinking. David gave us a lot to ponder. And so another thing that I'd like you to think about in the chat as we continue through this session is, what are you most excited and concerned about with ChatGPT and other kinds of generative AI in education? And so our next presenter here is Stephanie Russell, and she's going to talk to us about specifically the K through 12 realm, which is going to be a little bit different than higher education and the corporate world, which David touched on a little bit. So Stephanie, thank you for joining us, and please share what you've been exploring in K through 12 using ChatGPT.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I am, like Anne said, I'm going to cover some of what ChatGPT in K-12 education can do and how it's going to change things. So let's get started. My name is Stephanie Galvan Russell. I am a certified librarian in Austin, and I am an instructional designer doctoral candidate at Sam Houston. I have a lot of other things that you can see on the screen, but that's not as important as what we're going to talk about today. So before we get going, I do want to take a quick poll in the chat just really quickly. I want to kind of gauge where we are with how we feel about ChatGPT. So are you someone who wants to just block it, or are you someone who wants to unblock it? So just really quickly in the chat, I'm going to take about a minute here, and I want to know what we think about it. I love that. There's so many unblocks. Yay! That makes my heart so happy. Love that. I did a presentation on ChatGPT at the Texas Library Association conference 2 weeks ago, and it was a really fun gauge to see. I love it. If you really pressed me unblock, it was really fun to see how both sides had their really good reasonings, but at the end of it, I got everyone to want to unblock it. So I love that. Thank you, everybody. All right, let's keep going. So first thing I want to mention is, for those who do want to block it, or for those who have some worries about ChatGPT, is wait, stop the hate. We've already been through changes such as these. So when the calculator came out, and all the math teachers and everybody, and I wasn't included because I wasn't born yet, but I did teach math, so I can kind of talk about how we all thought calculators were going to encourage the cheating. And it didn't. It made math easier for students, and it allowed them to focus on the harder concepts and use the calculator as a tool. And that's also what happened when Google came out. And this is a really early photo of Google. And if I will share the link to the slides once I'm finished, but if you click on that image, you can see all the iterations that Google has gone through over the years. But we also thought the same thing when Google came out. All the teachers freaked out. We thought it was going to change everything. It was going to make cheating easier. It was going to make plagiarism easier. But we've been through it. We've been through this change. And so now that we have ChatGPT and other forms of AI coming out, it's just we're having the panic, we're having the growing pains, but we're going to get through it. I attended a webinar. Again, it's like y'all said, it felt like years ago, but it was only a month ago because things are changing so quickly. But it was by Matt Miller and the Wakelet team. And they said that what's really interesting is that the artificial intelligence available today is the least powerful that our students will ever see in their lifetime. That is amazing to me. And it made my heart a little sad because they said ChatGPT is the MySpace of artificial intelligence. So we look back on MySpace now and we're like, oh my goodness, like that was so funny how we did things. And like now we have Instagram and TikTok and Be Real and all the things. And to think about how kind of sad MySpace was, but it had a really cool start to how we use social media now. ChatGPT is the same thing, but it is the MySpace of AI. So we only are going to get more and more. So I do want to mention that we already have forms of artificial intelligence that we use in our everyday life. So if you have an Alexa or a Google Home or any of those tools, those are similar to what ChatGPT can do in that they take what you want and it answers your questions and it gives you other things, and there's plugins and there's lots of other options out there. If anybody is old enough to remember Smarter Child on AOL Instant Messenger, he was one of the original chatbots. I call him a he, but you can call it whatever you want. But he was one of the original chatbots. If you have a phone that detects your face to unlock it, that is a form of AI. If you use a tool like Grammarly, where you've got the text editors and autocorrects, or if you use chatbots and digital assistants like Siri, you're already using these tools. So what I encourage, especially when I'm talking to my teachers, is how we are training to reframe how we think about AI and ChatGPT specifically, not how is it going to make things worse or how it's going to make cheating available, but how it's going to encourage creativity and how is it going to be a tool for our students to take what they know and be able to show you that. So again, just a quick refresher on what David said. ChatGPT was launched in November, and it is just a chatbot that uses natural language, and it was fed on lots and lots of information. But I always like to point out that because it came out in 2022, all the information fed to it was prior to 2022. So it is going to have some biases. It is going to lack some things. But you do have to remember that because it is a bot, it had to be trained on something. And so all the information that it took is going to have different ideals, different, again, biases. And what's important is to talk through those with your students, with your teachers, with the people that you're training, and encourage them to think about using what we already use in teaching: your heart, your brain, your eyes. And I'm going to touch on that in a second. Okay. So if you've never played with ChatGPT, a few of the things that it can do, excuse me, for education is it can generate your learning objectives. You can tell it, hey, I'm going to do a lesson on frogs and for second graders, and it's going to be a 30-minute thing, and I want them to get this about it. I want them to learn about the life cycle, and I want them to be able to tell me something else. And you can just put that in there, like just kind of like a brain blast or just kind of thoughts out there. And it will take what you gave it and make your learning objectives. It can help you with research. It can give you lists of articles and resources that you can look through. But I do have a funny story about that. It can assist with homework. So similar to Conmigo, you can ask it to work through something with you and help your students. How many times does it happen where, your child or a student or someone you work with brings home homework that you don't know how to do? You can put it into ChatGPT and it can explain it to both of you. It can create multiple choice questions based on the learning objectives and then create those quizzes like David showed us. It can offer feedback. Just yesterday, I was creating an email to my boss about my summative evaluation for the year. And excuse me, the way I wrote it, I knew it didn't sound professional. And so I put my email into ChatGPT and I said, hey, can you offer some feedback about how I can change my email to sound more professional? And it did. And so I took that and showed my students and I said, hey guys, look, I put my original email into ChatGPT and it told me how to fix what I'm writing. It can give you the steps to solve math problems. Again, like David showed us, giving us questions and providing explanations. It can give you study tips. And because you can tell it the response that it gave you is a thumbs up or thumbs down, it can personalize your learning and gives you adaptive responses. So before I became a librarian, I taught elementary school for 4 years. I taught second grade. So it's been a minute, but I did think about how ChatGPT can change primary education and how it's going to make it easier, especially for our first year teachers. So let's say you're taking a difficult concept and you don't know like how to explain it to a kindergartner, or you can explain it to a kindergartner, but not a fifth grader. So you can say, hey, take this concept and explain it to a fifth grader or explain it to a kindergartner and put that in the tone of a second grade teacher. And it will give you that script or some key points on what to touch on. For teachers, I know this is a big one. It can make your lesson plans. It can give you your objectives, what you want your students to get out of it. It can give you your assessment. It can give you your activities. We know that there's a lot of use of story in elementary school. And so it can write those stories based on the objectives or based on what you want it to tell you. Especially in primary education, there's a lot of differentiation that needs to happen for all the different learning abilities. You can tell ChatGPT, here's my lesson plan, or use the lesson plan that you gave me and create 3 different differentiations for it so that I can allow my students to get different things out of it on their level. You can have it explain things in simple language. I played with this last night and have it give you a list of games for your lesson so that you can play and have a good time with your students and do more of that one-on-one and developing those relationships and not focus on the hard things like making the lesson plan and the objectives and all the things that kind of use our time in a way that is keeping us from truly making relationships with students. It can write your comprehension questions when your students are reading, and it can give improvement recommendations based on what you are getting your students to do. Now, I work in secondary education, and some of the things I have used it for is analysis. So I have shown my students, because ChatGPT's terms of use when it first came out were 18 and up, it just recently changed to 13 and up, but because it was 18 and up, I would put ChatGPT on the screen and show my students what it was doing. And so I would take their drafts of their essays and put it into ChatGPT and say, analyze these drafts, look for themes, look for key points, look for things that are repetitive, and it will do that. And then you can have your students look at the feedback it's giving them and change their writing. You can have it rewrite. So I had a student who was writing an essay about things that were going on at home and how that was relating to what was happening at school. And she wanted to make it into a story rather than an essay. And so I told her, put it into ChatGPT and see what it does. And so we had it rewrite her essay into a story. And you can change that, rewrite the story into something else. I have played with it where I've taken an article and said, make this article into a script so that my students can make a TV commercial from it, or take that article or that script and make it into a haiku. So you're condensing that material. Again, it can create your multiple choice questions. The big one that I use is that it can create a rubric, and then you feed your students assignments into it, and it will use that rubric to grade for you. That is a huge time killer for teachers. So this is going to save so much time. It can create tables to compare data. Again, answering questions, providing explanations, providing steps to solve problems, and those adaptive learning responses. I'm a librarian, so I had to throw in what it can do in the library. So it can generate discussion questions. I know there's a lot of times where my teachers want to have really good discussions based on what the students are reading in class. And it might have been a long time since I read that book, or maybe I just haven't had time to read that book. It can create those discussion questions more than just what was your favorite part of the story, who was your favorite character, those basic things, and create those higher order thinking questions that you can't come up with on the fly, or maybe you just didn't have time to. It can offer book summaries in the language of the students. So I put in, give me a summary of this book in a way that a sixth grader could understand. And it makes it so much easier. It can provide your writing feedback. There are a lot of times where I have a brain fart and I can't remember the word I'm thinking of. And I'll go into ChatGPT and say, give me a list of words like da 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 da, and it'll give me what I was thinking of. It can create lists of books for book displays. It can teach information literacy and generate those lessons for you and create resource lists for your research. So I had a student who was doing research and she said, give me a list of 10 resources about whatever she was researching. And when it gave her those lists, I said, okay, let's take the citations it gave you and put it into Google Scholar and find those resources. Well, there were a lot that we couldn't find. And so I went into ChatGPT and I said, hey, can you find more recent articles or articles that you can provide the link to or the DOI link? And a lot of them, it wasn't real. Some of them are being made up. So again, this is where we want to make sure that you're having conversations with students about looking and fact checking and checking what it is giving you, especially in those responses, and making sure that that is going to be relevant to what you are using it for. I also had somebody who was making a table of social media. They were making like a calendar of social media posts, and it was giving dates that were so far in the future. He was like, wait. I didn't want that, but you have to be very specific in what you want. So one of the huge things that I am most excited about ChatGPT for is that it is going to change how we teach and how we assign assignments. And this is kind of where my teachers start to think like, I encourage them to think, stop the lazy assignments. Stop having your students regurgitate. Instead of being consumers, let's encourage them to be creators. So let's take the information that we can get from ChatGPT or the information that we're learning and have them use it to create something. So I had a student who was writing, again, that story, the essay that became a story about things that were happening at home. And I said, let's use how it analyzed your story, how it made it into something else. And let's use that and use another tool called Book Creator and make an ebook out of it. So there we're taking what you've already created, made it into a story, and made it into something else. So we're being creative. Let's use the information we're getting. Let's use the tool to encourage creativity. Because if we're giving the students an assignment where they can go into Google or they can go into ChatGPT and say, hey, I want an essay about the Civil War. If it's something as simple as that, where they can copy and paste, what's really the problem? Is it them or is it the assignment? So again, we want to encourage that creativity and encourage our students. So rather than assigning that Civil War essay, maybe have them create a diorama. Maybe have them create a script. Maybe have them write a story from the point of view of someone who was living in the time of the Civil War. Encourage that creativity so that even if they're using ChatGPT, it's not going to be in a way that's going to hinder what they're learning. So I always want to talk about the prompts when you are using ChatGPT. So there is a difference between telling it, give me a list of resources about frogs, right? It can give you tons and tons of lists of resources about all the different kinds of frogs. And then we want to be specific and talk about and ask it, hey, give me a list of peer-reviewed sources about this specific frog. So now you're encouraging your students to think about what kind of sources do you want to get? How specific do you want your sources to be? And then you could even put in, describe the life of this specific frog and provide citations. So then you're getting that information that they're going to learn, plus where they can find more. And it's just like when I encourage my students when we're starting our research projects, no, we never use Wikipedia as a source, but we use it as a starting point. So we look at those resources that are at the end of the Wikipedia article, and we go and use those to formulate what we're going to write about. It's the same thing. We're using ChatGPT to give us those resources that we can then use to keep learning. And one of my favorite things is that no two responses that you get out of ChatGPT are going to be the same. You can put in the same prompt as I am right now, and we're going to get two different responses because it's going to learn and it's going to get better based on the feedback that you're giving it and saying, hey, I didn't like that response. I want it this way, or tailor that to a sixth grader. So again, we want to use ChatGPT for critical thinking. We don't have time for a demo, but it's okay. So there are literally endless possibilities of how it can be used, but because it was trained on biases, it still needs us, the humans. And there was a question in the Q&A that do I think that teachers or professors would ever be replaced by it? And absolutely not, because it still needs a human brain, it still needs eyes, and it needs a heart to make sure that what it's putting out is accurate and appropriate. For instance, I had a student who put into ChatGPT that he needed an essay about whatever we were talking about. And when he turned it in, I said, I know you. You've been a student in my class this is the second year now. Like, I know how you write. This is not how you write. Tell me what you did. And he was like, well, it was the last minute. I knew that I just needed to pass. And because he plays soccer, so I just put it into ChatGPT and I got my essay and copy pasted it and turned it in. And I said, okay, thank you for your honesty. But that's not what we want you to do. And so again, that's going back to needing that heart, those relationships that come as instructors, knowing when your students are going to use it and making sure they're using it appropriately and creatively. It is going to change how we think about cheating. There are two definitions of cheating on the screen that I don't want to read for you because everyone can read here, but the definition of cheating is very different from the definition of plagiarism. And the US Copyright Office says that only a human can own something copyrighted. And as a librarian, copyright is a huge thing I talk about. But I do want to reiterate that because it is not human and the prompts that you're getting out of it have been generated, the prompts you're putting in have been generated by a human, you can use it when you're creating other things. I wouldn't copy paste like my student did. So this is going to change how we rethink plagiarism and cheating. And this is a really cool graphic that Matt Miller made. You are welcome to use it as he has given us permission to use it and other things. But it's going to change how we think about cheating on this spectrum. So on the bottom, we have a student who wrote their entire assignment content without consulting the AI or the internet. Fine, right? That's what we've encouraged. But then you have the student who wrote main ideas, ChatGPT generated a draft of it, and then the student offered feedback to improve. So they're using that feedback that it's giving to improve their own ideas. Or where the student plugged the prompt in, copied their response and submitted it to the teacher. That's full use of ChatGPT. That's where we don't want. We want the student all the way either in the middle or towards the end where it's getting its ideas from ChatGPT and using it. But I also want you to think about when you are submitting a paper, when you are submitting anything that you're doing, we ask our peers, hey, would you mind looking at this and offering feedback? Could you look at where maybe I'm missing something or where something I could add to or where I can improve? This is the same thing. But think about people like me. I'm a librarian. I am the one person in my department at my school. I don't often have that group to where I can ask, hey, would you mind looking at this for me? ChatGPT is that person for me now. Can you offer feedback on what I wrote? Can you look at where I'm missing? Can you look at common themes in these different things I've written? So it's going to change how we think about it. And it is going to be uncomfortable for a while, but we have to think about how it's going to be good rather than how it's going to make things difficult. So there are other really cool AI tools out there that I don't have time to get into, but I encourage you to check them out and play with them. They're really fun. And if you would like, I have additional resources linked in my slides. There was a really great webinar that I've talked about from the Wakelet team about threat or opportunity. And I also have a Wakelet full of resources, including how you can change your prompts, how you can think about prompts, and that is on the screen. But the link to my slides where you can find everything is right here. And I'm going to drop that in the chat for everyone. Whoops. And that way you get a second to get it. All right, I put that in the chat. You are welcome to the slides. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on the screen as well as on the slides, and I am happy to get back to you and answer any questions you have. Thank you so much, AECT, for having me.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. So many interesting ideas in there that could be adapted for higher education as well and training, and not just in K through 12, but a lot for us to think about. One thing, we've had some really awesome conversation in the chat, but another thing to think about, what do you wish was done with AI when you were in school? So think about that as we then move on to our last set of presenters who are going to talk about AI in training. So this is Anna Paula Correa from Ohio State University, and she has some of her graduate students with her who helped her with some research. So Anna Paula, please share with us what you've been doing.
Hello, everyone. I want to, before I start, I want to ask my co-presenters to introduce themselves. Sean and Fan, please.
Sure. My name is Sean Hickey, and I am the Deputy Director for Assessment Services at The Ohio State University's Center on Education and Training for Employment, also known as CEAT. And as Anne mentioned, I'm also a PhD candidate working with Dr. Correa in the field of learning technologies.
Hello, everyone. My cat is trying to join us. So, my name is Fan Xu. I'm a senior learning designer at the Center on Education and Training for Employment. And I'm a fourth-year PhD student. Oh, actually, I will graduate this Sunday. But yeah, so I'm right now a PhD now. So thanks for having me today. I'll hand it to Dr. Correa.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Anna Paula Correa, and I'm a professor of learning technologies at The Ohio State University. But today we'd like to start by establishing the context for ChatGPT used in a learning development training organization, like the center that I direct and where Sean and Fan also have important roles. It has a long name, as Fan and Sean already mentioned, is the Center on Education Training for Employment. Short name is CEAT, and it is a translation research center under the College of Education and Human Ecology. We have about 60 people working in the center, including program directors, researchers, project managers, psychometricians, graduate students, and faculty associates. We run an operation that crosses 8 different program areas, ranging from assessment to online learning. For the last 6 to 7 months, we have been experimenting with ChatGPT with the intent to learn as much as we can about this new technology and find ways that this tool can be used to increase productivity, especially in areas like assessment, workforce transformation, and online learning. And again, CEAT is just offering this context for something that we are doing specifically by using ChatGPT in a learning development and training organization. As part of these efforts to experimenting and learn with ChatGPT, we put together a quick reference ebook on the role of artificial intelligence in learning and development. I think Sean is going to drop it on the chat, which is now available for free at Apple Bookstore. And in March, so last March, not too far along, we led a professional development session at the center to introduce ChatGPT to the community and demonstrate some ways of using it, for example, to automate administrative tasks, as well as to support the marketing and communication team. Since then, we have extended use of ChatGPT to many other areas in our center. Again, that is the context that we're going to talk about today. But we also discussed extensively among the three of us, but also among other members from the SEED community about the pros and cons of using this technology in our center. So Sean and Fan are going now and share specific examples of how a tool like ChatGPT can be used in a learning development and training organization. So Sean, back to you.
All right. So as I mentioned, I'm the Deputy Director for the assessment program at SEET. And part of what we do in assessment is create credentialing exams for various industry credentials. We work with different credentialing bodies to develop those tests. We also work with the state of Ohio to develop end-of-course tests for their career technical education programs. And so we do a lot of test development. And the process that we follow is a pretty industry standard. It's what I would say the standard process, time-tested, research-backed process for developing test items, but it's a long process. It involves having a panel of subject matter experts, usually made up of industry representatives, of post-secondary and secondary instructors. And these subject matter expert panels first review the standards, and then they meet several times, both in person and virtually, to develop the items. And then we have a long QA process where we review those items. And so in the field of assessment specifically, there has been this growth in looking for opportunities for what's called automated item generation, or AIG. And it has existed for a while in some of the types of questions like math tests, where you can simply plug in different numbers for calculation. But it's been a lot harder to get AIG items around career technical education and using higher order thinking skills. And a large part of that is because of the subject matter expertise necessary to create those. And so over the past few months, we've been experimenting to see if it's possible to use ChatGPT to help us generate test items, what that looks like in the process, and whether we can possibly use this as a method of creating test items moving forward to speed up the test development time, reduce the labor costs and the amount of hours that people need to spend developing these test items. So that was sort of our goal. And as we've been discussing, a lot of it comes down to creating high quality prompts. And so we've been spending a lot of time taking a look at prompt engineering and different ways of providing information to ChatGPT in order to get the output you want. And it's definitely going to be an emerging skill moving forward. There's been a lot of discussion on that already in the chat about how prompt engineering and figuring out how to develop that prompt rather than just a trial and error method. That's going to be a skill that's going to be increasingly important as we move beyond, as Stephanie called it, the MySpace of AI into really more complex AI systems. And so these are some of the things that we've been looking at. The first, and I think most important, is providing context. And so for our sample questions that we were experimenting with, we let ChatGPT know that this is an end-of-course assessment. Specifically, we were creating questions for the agribusiness course, which is part of the agriculture and environmental systems career field. And then under clarity, we made use of lots of short sentences. Rather than one long prompt, the prompts can be multiple sentences. So for example, The course description is as follows, and we'd put in the course title and the course description. The outcome being assessed is as follows, and we'd put in the text from the standards of the outcome. And then the specific competency to be covered by the question is, and we'd put in what competency we're trying to cover. For examples, we will provide possibly, clone this item. David mentioned that in his presentation, giving it an example of what a test item could look like and providing other relevant information. The test questions should be written at a 9th grade level, should be written for a high school audience, should be at the end of the course. Response criteria might include that there are 4 answer choices, that we are not using questions that use not or except. We're not using all of the above or none of the above, and sticking to some of those multiple choice item best practices. And so we created a really detailed prompt for an item, and this is what we got. The competency was specifically about students' understanding of business and the laws of supply and demand. And so this is a question that was generated by ChatGPT. And like David said, this is not the end. This isn't the, great, we're done with the question, let's move on. But it's a starting point that we can use to maybe advance the process a little bit further. And so there are some concerns and some risks, and we had to consider those as well. And so, for example, a lot of talk has been occurring in the chat about the hallucinations that ChatGPT has and how you can't always trust the information it comes up with. So all of the items that we generate via ChatGPT need to be validated by our subject matter experts. There's also a potential item security risk because you're uploading information in a prompt and it's being created by ChatGPT, so we have to be cognizant of that. But we do think that this is the potential for possibly a new model, not quite automated item generation, but what we're kind of calling semi-automated item generation, where we can, before we even meet with the subject matter experts, generate a bank of items that have been created by ChatGPT and then begin the process there. Maybe we don't use the items at all, but maybe they serve as an opportunity for creative thinking, or they edit them or turn them into multiple test items. So that's sort of where we're hoping this might go in the future. Of course, as I mentioned, we're right now at the experimental phase, but it's really exciting to see what ChatGPT might be able to do in the field of assessment as we move forward. And with that, I will turn it over to Fan, who's going to talk a little bit about learning design and what she does.
Thanks, Sean. I'm happy to share my journey as a user and a learning designer at AECT into the rabbit hole about using ChatGPT. So for most AI products that have come out before, it's always been that's okay, that's fine, but it's never been great. But ChatGPT is different. So most thing that I put into this so far has been relatively good. So I have been using it a lot in my daily work. And so ChatGPT can answer questions, of course, and the question could be relevant to different subjects, and it provides relevant information and educational resources. It can also generate draft ideas and content for my training and projects. So using natural language processing, ChatGPT can also identify and highlight spelling, grammar, and punctuation errors. So I can use it to review my materials. And it can also provide feedback on the clarity of my instructions, the relevance of my content, and the effectiveness of my assessment. And besides, it can analyze learners' responses and provide personalized feedback for the learners. So on the next slide, let's take a look at some use cases for learning design that I found especially helpful. So one of them is scenario draft generation. Here is an example from my work. So AECT developed the Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or READY initiative to increase our efforts towards the pursuit of a holistic approach to equity, social justice, and inclusion. So the Getting Ready curriculum is an online learning module that I've been working on. The module is under this initiative, and the online module aims to make ready a day-to-day priority and create an very inclusive and diverse workplace. So when I developed the online module, I used ChatGPT to create a bunch of scenarios to help my learners understand the topics in the setting of workplace. So this is the prompt I use. You are an learning designer who is working on training for implicit bias. Create a scenario where implicit bias happens at the workplace, which could be used in this training. So here is what is spit out. You can see that the scenario starts from the introduction of two characters in this scenario. And the Black female character, Shannon, feels like her idea is not taken seriously, and her white male colleague is given more credibility and respect. So even though their ideas are pretty similar. I think this is a good scenario for my training. And then it gives some suggestions on how you can use the scenario in your training. And it gives a list of questions that you can ask. That's cool, right? But whether or not these questions are good, it gives us a nice starting point, as we can easily modify them or just use a part of them, or even don't use any of them. So this is where your originality and your creativity as a human being come into play. So on the next slide, I'll show you another use case, which is translation. So SEED's Advancing Ohio's English Learner Project is designed to create a comprehensive system of supports for English learners and their families whose school learning and engagement have been negatively impacted during the pandemic. So the ultimate stakeholders of this project are children and their families who speak diverse mother languages. So a huge part of our design is to translate our materials. So translation often requires specific expertise that may not always be available in a design team. So ChatGPT can help here. In this example, I give it a sentence in English and ask it to translate this sentence into 6 different languages in just one answer. So if you speak any of these languages, feel free to help me check whether ChatGPT is doing a good job. So there are many other AI products that can help us to translate our images, audios, and videos. As I can use ChatGPT to write instructions, use AI voices to read them, and other AI tools to create videos and audios, it makes me wonder, will I still have this job in 5 years or 10 years? So I'm not sure the answer, but I know there are a lot of initiatives promoting the use of AI. So it is not what we designers can do to stop the trend, right? So as some job may disappear, I believe there are some related job will emerge as well. So I believe for our designers, it is important to not only be aware of these tools, but also to learn how to use them. It's a wonderful chance to push the boundary for us and to have our field involved with the support of these technologies. So I'll hand it back to Dr. Kohia. Oh, you are muted.
Thank you, Fan, for being so honest about your job. It was a good point because many people have that question in their mind. So it's always good to, verbalize and put it out to expand the discussion. So I I know David and Stephanie already mentioned this topic, but I'm just going to maybe highlight some other aspects of the support of ChatGPT for the production of scholarly work. So as a translation research center, we produce a significant amount of scholarly work. So we have been exploring ways to use ChatGPT to support us in this endeavor. For example, this tool can be used to analyze and visualize data by generating natural language descriptions of graphs and charts, which can add to the way we make sense of data and communicate research findings with the large public. Also, ChatGPT can be used to assist with research design. We have, at the center, we have several emergent researchers, and writing a research question or hypothesis seems hard. It's somewhat hard for them because they are just starting their careers as researchers. So we can use ChatGPT to help formulate, reword, or refine research questions and hypotheses. So we've been doing that, a little bit of that as well. And as you probably know by now, ChatGPT can really help you to create an outline for a paper or help you refine academic writing by generating suggestions to improve sentence structure, vocabulary, and grammar. And this can be particularly useful for non-native English speakers like myself or those struggling with writing in general. And there's probably other ways to use ChatGPT to support our scholarly work at the center, but I just picked these three as an examples to share with you all. And next slide, please, Sean. And we could not end this short presentation without talking a little bit about the downsides of ChatGPT. I know David and Stephanie mentioned some of them, even Sean and Fan, but just like to summarize some of those downsides of using ChatGPT. One is limited knowledge. And I know Stephanie is a librarian, she did stress that. So the model training data is only up to September of 2021. So ChatGPT does not have any information after September 2021. So many results might not be up to date or simply made up. Just want to share a word of caution related to ChatGPT limited knowledge that Stephanie already mentioned, but it's always good to stress. Don't trust any references or citations offered by ChatGPT, as most of them are fake. And we've been experienced with that and testing ChatGPT, and so far it has been failing. So all references or URLs need to be carefully verified, and most of them are non-existing. So just a word of caution there. Another problem that comes with generative AI in general, not just ChatGPT, is bias. So the language model responses are generated based on patterns and relationships. It learns from the training data, which contains biases and incorrect information. This may perpetuate harmful stereotypes and reinforcing social inequalities, and we have to be very aware of that. The other one is lack of emotional intelligence. In simple words, ChatGPT is an artificial language model that generates text by analyzing input data. It does an impressive work, I agree, I give it to it, but it's not a real being or a companion. It lacks emotional intelligence, which means its responses will not provide the levels of comfort, empathy, or emotional support humans can do for each other. And finally, the absence of creative thinking. ChatGPT has limitations in generating novel ideas or viewpoints that are exclusive to humans. And the aspect of creative thinking, Stephanie had stressed it very well. So I'm not going to be talking more about this, but Again, those are my points, or those are our points for you to ponder as an audience. And I think this kind of concludes our brief presentation, and we are back to Anne. Thank you.
Thank you so very much to the three of you. Lots of more really great information and things to think about. One more thing for you to think about that will help us too in providing additional resources and professional development for you is, what do you still need to learn about ChatGPT and generative AI? So I added that question into the chat. So if you want to drop some ideas in there, and we do also have a quick survey after you leave the session, but we do have some time now for some questions. We've had some people add things into the Q&A, and we won't have time to get to all of them. A couple of things that that we didn't address, like Christina Andrew asked, when ChatGPT is being used for scholarly work in these examples, how are you attributing it and acknowledging how you are using it? So I think not just in scholarly work, but what should we be recommending for our own students too? Would any of our panelists like to address that?
Well, I will say that recently, at least one academic publisher has put in a requirement that if you're submitting a manuscript, you have to include a paragraph listing the extent to which you use ChatGPT or other AI tools. But personally, I think a lot depends on how you use it. It feels a little strange to me to give ChatGPT sort of preference over things like Grammarly or spell checker if I'm only using it to improve my writing or double check it. But it really is going to vary right now a lot from publisher to publisher, at least for scholarly work.
Yeah, and I'll just add that Science, which is one of the premier academic journals in the world, has released a statement saying that you may not list ChatGPT as a co-author, but that you should list it like in your methodology section. If you do your statistical analysis with R version 3.14, where you list the kind of tools that you're using, that you would just list ChatGPT there and describe the way you used it there, the same way that you described the way that you used a statistical analysis tool.
Okay, another question that was just kind of touched on in a couple of people's presentations, but might be interesting to address here more fully, is the issue of bias. So a couple of people had questions about that, about reinforcing bias. It used a biased data set to be trained, and it is producing biased and stereotyped output. How do we account for this? How do we, first become aware of it, and how do we, combat that, but also make our students more aware of that?
If I can just interject here, I think as many things in life, you address that with education. So one effort that we are making right now at our center is to really increase the education and deep learning about racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that education is going to allow us to read any output from ChatGPT and recognizes instances of bias, prejudice, and discrimination. So there's not really a good recipe, because we are all experimenting and trying things, but as ourselves growing as with more knowledge and the skills, and develop our skills in the diversity, inclusion, and racial equity fields. I'm not an expert, so I'm also learning along with the other members of the SID community. It's been making more sensitive, not only to ChatGPT outputs, but other instances in our life as academicians. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
So another question that has come up that was raised in the chat a couple times too was about academic integrity. And, how do you tell whether students have been using ChatGPT to produce work that they are submitting? And how do you prevent that from happening? And I know, Stephanie, you gave a couple of examples of different kinds of assessment. But maybe you or some of our other panelists could speak to the issue of academic integrity.
So when I've used it with my students, again, putting it up on the screen and showing them how to use it, I've always encouraged them to use it as a tool or a starting point rather than where you're going to get all your information. And I compare it to Google, right? When we are researching or when we're using different articles or databases, you don't just use one thing, you use more than one. You get a whole bunch of different articles to find what you want to research or where you're going to pull quotes from. So we're not just using one thing, we're using multiple things. And so if they're only using ChatGPT, I talk about how that's like a hindrance. Like I have a lot of students who are athletes, like you wouldn't just use one drill when you're practicing, you're going to use all sorts of drills to kind of better all of your skills. And so we're going to use multiple tools, just like we would do in every classroom. And so I encourage them to think about not just how we can use it, but how we can use it effectively and use all the tools in our toolbox so that we can make sure that what we're learning in a way that isn't going to hinder us.
I think if I can just add on a little bit, a little anecdote that's unrelated, but it'll come back. We have an online testing platform that we developed at CEAT. And in working with subject matter experts, when we have images and questions, we of course add alternative text so that screen readers can describe the image. And we have gotten pushback from subject matter experts because if you hover over the image, it'll describe it, it'll show you that. And they say that gives away the answer. And my response has always been, then it's a bad question. If it's just about identifying what the picture is, that's so low level that you shouldn't even be asking it. And I kind of feel the same way about assignments. If it is possible to just completely do the assignment in ChatGPT, maybe it's time to rethink the assignment and find a better way to have students demonstrate a deep level of knowledge, demonstrate creativity that ChatGPT can't do. And I think you'll have better learning outcomes as a result.
And I completely agree. And I get the same pushback as Sean when I tell the teachers, maybe the kids aren't the problem, maybe you're the problem, and they hate it. But I'm like, guys, we want to encourage their thinking because like they mentioned earlier, we're not going to prepare them for the world when they get out of school or when they get out of higher education if we're not using the tools that are going to be there. And I also have the same thing where I'm encouraging the teachers, rethink your assignments, because again, if they can just Google it or put it in ChatGPT, who's the problem here? So just a quick example, I had a teacher who was having students analyze fairy tales. And so I said, how about instead of just analyzing and writing an essay, we rewrite the fairy tale so that it's applicable to now. And then they used that and they made dioramas. Like it was a whole thing, but it was rethinking how we assign. And I think that's where we're going to have to do a lot more of instructional design and trainings about how we rethink what we're assigning, but also catering to where our kids are and where they're going.
I also think it's true that a lot of us would say that we grade for spelling and grammar, but people have been using spell check and grammar check for a decade now or longer. So at some point, I think in addition to changing our assignments, we change the skills that we're grading for, the skills that we're assessing. If you want me to write an outline, that's great. If I use ChatGPT to write the outline faster, better, smarter, with better grammar, without spelling problems, I think we have a history of leveraging tools, coming forward, and it does it's not that you don't grade for spelling and grammar anymore, but you sort of don't expect to see many of those mistakes because everybody's using spell check and everybody's using grammar check, and that's an AI, and they're all using it, and they're all using it to improve their grades. So if we feel like we have a problem with people using AI to improve their grades, then maybe we should tell them they shouldn't use spell check or grammar check either. Right?
Yeah, and in our conversation with Brett Anders on our last podcast, he was giving the example of someone who had earned their PhD several years ago and typed it, but was sent back to have it handwritten because good penmanship was an indicator of professionalism and, academic rigor. And, a lot of schools don't teach penmanship anymore. So I think this is also going to make us consider what are the skills that we want students to leave school with.
I do want to add a quick anecdote about that. I had a conversation about that exactly yesterday. I do want to mention Texas is adding cursive back into the curriculum, but I told Arlene yesterday I didn't know if I was going to be able to attend today because my district's entire Wi-Fi and phone system went down because an 18-wheeler crashed into where we had like the servers. And so my kids had to actually write for the entire day. And we had almost zero complaints. The complaints were more from the teachers because we could not read their handwriting, but it was really interesting to see how the kids are going to adapt. They're going to figure it out. But it was really interesting to see that. And I talked to them a lot about that. And we had a lot of really good conversations about how, yeah, writing is important, but where they're going, they may not need to do that.
So we could probably continue this discussion for several more hours, but we are at time. I really want to thank our panelists so much for sharing their expertise and their ideas with us. And thank all of you, our participants, who were so active in the chat with so many great ideas and questions. We will be, as I said, sharing this recording with everyone who has registered. So if you know someone that would like to get the recording and links to the slides in the chat, please do have them register for the session. We do also have a couple more sessions coming up. This is a 3-part series. Our next session will be next Friday at a different time. It will be at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And we will be diving deeper where you'll be able to select from some different use cases and go into breakout rooms and learn a little bit more about how people use generative AI like ChatGPT in their work in education. And then we have one more the following week where we'll be looking at some future directions of where to go with generative AI and ChatGPT, and also some research that is being conducted on it. So thank you again all for your time, and thank you for attending.